Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the third episode of the Sit Down series. My name is Wariboko Semenitari. I am the president of the ACC Artists of Color Coalition here in UMTAD. Today, we are joined by the amazing Kamilah Forbes. Kamilah Forbes is an esteemed award-winning director and producer for theater and television. She currently serves as the executive producer at the world-famous Apollo Theater in Harlem. In her diverse body of work, Kamilah is noted for having a strong commitment to the development of creative works by, for, and about the hip hop generation. This Howard University alum has won awards for both directing and producing, including the 2019 NBTF Larry Leon Hamlin Producer Award and an NAACP Image Award. Camillah's directing credits include Between the World and Me, by the way, Meet Vera Stark, written by Lynn Nottage, Blood Quilt, written by Katori Hall, and Sunset Baby, written by Dominique Morisseau. She has also worked closely with Kenny Leon on The Wiz Live, A Raisin in the Sun, Mountaintop, and Stick Fly on Broadway. She has produced several works for television, most notably the seventh season of the Tony Award and Peabody Award winning series Russell Simmons Presents Deaf Poetry on HBO. Camillah's most recent directorial work, Between the World and Me, aired as a special event on HBO and HBO Max in November 2020 to critical acclaim. In addition to her work at the Apollo Theater, Kamillah is set to direct the Broadway premiere of Soul Train alongside Questlove, Dominique Morisseau, and Camille A. Brown. Ms. Forbes is a powerful leader, widely known for her ability and commitment to continue to highlight the ideas, complexities, and work of artists in the hip hop community and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, the amazing Kamilah Forbes. I'm gonna go ahead and give you a virtual applause right here with your hand on the Zoom call. It is such an honor to be talking to you today. I have grew up watching Def Poetry Jam. Like, there's so many questions that like I could start, and really, I just want to go from day one, really, for you as a producer and director, because really, it just sounds like, and it hits that. Correct me if I'm wrong. You've been producing from jump and directing from jump, like since Howard till now, and I just wonder, like, where did it all start? What was the beginning, and what made you say, you know what, as you were leaving college and in your senior year, I want to produce as well as direct?
So I think, well, first of all, thank you for having me on. This is really exciting to be in conversation with you, Ariboko. But what I will say is that, it was always about creating space. There were works that, and voices, what moves me in the theater is this opportunity to see stories, images like myself reflected. When I was in college and also in high school, that's when actually I also started producing. There were works out there that were diverse, that were et cetera, but somehow, there were also opportunities where I didn't really feel like it was a complete reflection of even the generational voice. And theaters at that time, although at that point in time, August Wilson was being widely produced, but I just didn't feel like there was a wide breadth of diversity from a generational perspective, from a tone perspective, from an aesthetic perspective. So, this was an opportunity to, quite frankly, make space, and to make space for the art that I wanted to see out there. And that's really what led me to producing. And quite frankly, that's what keeps me in the realm of producing at this point in time.
I love that you said the realm of producing, because I feel like societally, especially the American cultural like entertainment landscape, what we're looking at is a lot of artists are in hibernation. And what a lot of people forget about the arts is that like producing and directing are as much as an art form as well as like being in front of the stage and screen.
That's
So I
right.
wonder for you, like, how have you been? I like to use the term artist in hibernation, like not artist in pandemic.
Mhm.
So as we've been in this hibernational experience, what has kept you artistic and creative, and like really kept your own like artistic mind in the producing sense, like active, and as well as the directing
Yeah.
world?
Well, I think in one respect, in my role at the Apollo Theater, we quickly pivoted about a year ago to really look at digital producing as a very real viable option, yeah, and part of the way in which we continue to serve our mission. So, up until now, we produced close to 65 digital events. We established a modality called our Apollo Digital Stage. So that's really kept us active, as you would say, and not necessarily in hybrid, not necessarily, we didn't pause, we didn't stop, we just shifted. We changed gears. But another project, which is a project that I collaborated on with Talented Wilkes, which we had built the stage version of Between the World and Me. And this was, taking the work of Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Talvin as a dramaturg was so incredibly brilliant and incredibly instrumental in building a text that could be performed for the theater. We did that in 2018. We're premiered in New York and Washington, D.C. at the Kennedy Center and the Apollo, and then began to tour 2018 and 2019. We had a robust tour plan for 2020 and 2021, and unfortunately, the health pandemic put a stop to the touring plans, but the racial reckoning pandemic, quite frankly, served as a point where it was a necessity that that work be shared, and made available for people to truly not only bear witness to, but be in conversation with, and which ultimately kind of led an urgency around a path of building a property that, or building a piece of work that people could consume during the pandemic. And in that respect, that was television. And so we built alongside with HBO, the HBO special Between the World and Me. And that really kept me creatively motivated, because it was the first time I've ever done a film as a director, the sole director. I've obviously was, with Wiz Live, I was the associate director, et cetera.
Yeah, because I saw that you associate directed the Wiz Live, which was also amazing. Another digital applause that we're given. Yes.
Exactly. So, this is a different animal, it's a different beast. So yeah, it was, and it was a different beast because we were building a film that was a very hybrid film that sort of, like, when you think about definitions, it didn't consider it a doc or a narrative, et cetera, but we're also building it during pandemic, where literally people could not come together, and the whole sole purpose of the craft is about bringing people together. So, we had to overcome a lot of challenges, but the urgency to tell the story, was greater.
Also, if you haven't seen Between the World and Me on HBO, you should go see it. It is amazing. Because now that brings me to my next question. You talked about, so you just talked about how the Apollo Theater, you guys didn't pause, which I believe this was also on the news too when it had come out. Like, you guys didn't pause, you shifted to just digital, whereas like a lot of theaters were taking a break. So now I wonder, let's go into like your process. What was the difference in processes for shifting to a digital landscape with the Apollo Theater? And then also like with a work like Between the World and Me, because these were two artistic revenues that were supposed to be in person but changed. So what were the differences? What were the successes? What were the failures? What was the process like for you in that, like in this room of many different roles?
Yeah. So for the Apollo, it was really simple. We, back in March of 2020, there was a real, New York really was the epicenter, one of the first epicenters of the pandemic back then. And by New York, we being in Harlem, the Apollo being in Harlem, our constituent space being Harlem, Upper Manhattan, whereas the epicenter of the epicenter, communities of color was the epicenter of the epicenter. It was important that we remain visible. It was important that our even website, we switched to really looking at ourselves as a convener. We started an initiative called Apollo Cares, which really was an opportunity for us to share with our surrounding community, social information, i.e. food banks, i.e. Places in which you can get tested, i.e. job banks, like i.e. safe spaces, safe havens. And so as a cultural arts center, we knew our place in our community had to shift our focus of really being the center of the community. which meant it was necessary for us to remain vigilant, to remain active, and to keep at least a semblance of our doors open. So that was the first impetus. The second was, then how do we also make sure that we find ways to continue to serve with mission aligned programming that included, yes, performances, yes, also supporting our artists with a series of commissions that we had already initiated. And overnight, we as art centers were completely impacted by the pandemic, where the Apollo, we saw a loss of revenue of 5 million. But we were an institution. Imagine individual artists who had lost work overnight, which is now almost a whole year. It was important for us to make sure that we kept those artists employed, that we found ways to continue to serve mission, and continue to, continue to serve our mission and keeping artists employed and artists active. So, you know, that was a big part of the thinking around, you know, the instituting and the starting of the digital stage versus a complete shutdown. We know the place that we serve, particularly in the Black artist community, and we had to be and continue to be vigilant around that, and be a leader around that as well. And then in regards to Between the World and Me, the thinking around that was also very simple. It was a response. It was an urgent response to what was happening in the world. I remember, you know, we were talking about the protests around the country were at the height. And I think as artists, we had a conversation, and at that point it was myself, Susan Kalechi, Watson, and Ta-Nehisi Coates. We were on a call, and we were on a Zoom game night, actually. And it was like, you know, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna say? You know, and knowing that, you know, as artists,
Welcome back to our amazing conversation with the amazing Kamillah of Forbes. My name is Wariboko Semenitari, and I'm the president here of ACC, and we're back here again. So what we were just talking about, Kamillah, we were talking about producing and in the processes of like Between the World and Me on HBO versus like also the Apollo Theater's programming. And you talked about how like you guys were serving your community from food banks to artists. And now a question that I wanted to ask you, like you as a leader in both of these rooms, really in the belly of the beast, how did you remain grounded and centered? Because you were what a beautiful thing that your art was doing, that like one day I hope for my art to do this, and a lot of us hope for, is that like the art was serving the people. But then it's also like, how are you like also reminding to serve yourself while still being able to serve the people?
I would say is that I have an amazing support network around me, from my family, my parents, my partner, my community of friends. We stand up and in for one another. I think that's so critical, particularly at this time when we really have been faced with the vulnerability of life this whole year. It is important, I think, to have those networks that can rejuvenate you, that can, that who you can be accountable to also, but at the same time, can remind you to pour back into yourself. I That's probably first and foremost key, is that network, and remind you about self-care. I mean, for me, that's what's so critical, is that friend and family network, for sure. Especially this year, we've had to lean on them in a most incredible and dire and urgent way.
A really cool thing that I just love that you said was, you said the word dire and unique, because a thing that I love about those words in relation to you and what you've produced is that like especially as Black people and like the things we like consume every day, there's a lot of like Black art that comes your way that you're just like, I don't want to see Black trauma. And the art that you've made has been like art that isn't beneficial of Black trauma, but really it's like art that is dire and unique. And so I wonder like dire and unique, by that I mean like dire for like us, that's helpful, that people need to escape, and also unique because like the entertainment industry hasn't seen it before and hasn't seen it yet. So then my question to you now is, what does it feel like to be at the beginning of a movement? And also, what does it feel like to be like on the brink of the change, if that makes sense?
So when you say the beginning of a movie, uh-oh, did I freeze?
Oh yeah, you're back now. Yes. When like
Oh,
for instance, with beginning of a movement, like when you brought hip, like when you started introducing a show like Holla If You Hear Me, If You Hear Me, Def Jam, stuff like that, like that was the begin, like before we were even thinking about In the Heights,
uh,
Hamilton, like hip hop coming to the theater. And then also that's what I mean by like being like the beginning and this new voice in the theatrical canon. And then also like being on the difference between them, like when you're on the brink, or like, because this time is also, there's been a lot of change for Black artists and change in like things that's being seen. So like, what is the
oh, I
differences in that
see.
way?
I see. Do you know what's interesting? I think when you're in it, you can't really have that much analysis, right? Because you're in it. And what's driving you to do those things, it's always out of a need, a necessity, to fill a need, to fill a gap. When I think about even just cultural arts movements, when I think about social movements, if we think about the Black arts movement in the 60s, if I think about the civil rights movement in the 60s, none of those, I think, pioneers, if you will, from a political or social perspective, really would even call themselves pioneers. What they knew is that they were fighting for their own truth, that they were fighting to make space for what they knew and they believed to be right, to be righteous. And did not have the perspective or the analysis of what that ripple effect was for the real, for the wider world, for a historical context. So I just say that to say is that I don't, all I know is that, you know, what it is on the inside on a day to day, not necessarily at this idea of a beginning of a movement. And it is all about, you know, of what led me to theater, which is making space, is finding those opportunities to make space. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Now, out of just sheer curiosity, because now let's make space for a fun question. I had
Great.
a fun question here is if you could mix any hip hop album to soundtrack a Shakespeare play, which one would you pick and why?
So, oh, that's interesting. Shakespeare play. Oh, you know what? Oh, why we gotta do it to a Shakespeare play? Anyway, whatever. It's fine.
I mean, we
I'm
could do
playing
it.
a game. I'm just messing with you. I'm just messing with you. I got the album. I would say the Black Star album. So that's Mos Def Talib Kweli. That came out, what, 1999? I would remix that album to score, probably to score Hamlet. I think that album is all about introspection, identity. If we think about some of the songs that are on the album, from Redefinition to, you know, it's all about identity. It's all about searching for identity. It's all about searching for voice, searching for self. So that's what I would think might be interesting.
And then if you could adapt any hip hop album from your childhood for a play today, which one would you pick?
For my childhood.
Yeah, it can be college, high school as well. Which
You know
one?
what? I would say the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. That's a good one. Yeah, that could be interesting to adapt.
And if you could reproduce any Black female playwright in history right now, which one would you pick and what play of hers would you do?
Hmm. Do you know what I would think? I'm gonna blank on the name of Intizaki's play. It's not Lorraine, but it's a woman's name that is very rarely done. I know Talvin is actually saying it right now.
Is it Okra
But
and
it
Greens?
is not Okra and Greens. It's a singular name, and I just love the language on the name. Oh my God! But it would be that play. I would say that one, but I can't remember the name of it. Ooh.
So,
Marianne. I can't remember. Anyway, it's barely produced. That's the problem.
I always say this to my friends because like when I first started drama school, some of us would always be like, "Oh, I feel like there's not enough Black characters other than August Wilson." I was like, "There is a Black cat, and it's just like it's not being produced enough." And I was just like, it's just funny that you
That's the
said that.
problem.
It's like we always think there's no canon, but there are so many writers and stories. It's just
So
the
many.
industry has not caught up to it, which brings me to my next question. You have worked with a lot of like industry greats, especially like Black female like industry greats, from Dominique Morisseau to Lorraine Hansberry to Lynn Nottage. And I wonder like, what are the lessons that you've learned from each of these different playwrights as
Mm.
someone who has been in, I'm going to take your word here, the realm of their plays?
So I've worked a lot with Dominique and love her dearly as a friend. What I would say is that I love working with people who I really love and like. I think that's really critical in forming creative collaborations. That's one. Um, with Dominique, I would say that I have learned the word unapologetic about choices and decisions. With Katori, I have learned the key of making space for everyone at the table. With Lynn Nottage, I have learned the words around kind of graceful intention. I take a lot from each and every one of them by observing, by being in collaboration with them. But that's what I would say for each and every one. For those
And
three.
what is a lesson that, because I had a teacher who used to say, you can't grow as an artist until you grow as a person as well, that both of those growths are synonymous. So I wonder for you, like, what is a lesson that you've taught yourself, like, as you've been growing and changing and will continue to like grow and change because we're all evolving people and artists. So like,
Yeah.
what's a lesson that you've taught yourself?
One of the lessons I would say would be trusting your voice. And even most recently to making a transition, even as a director from theater to television. It's there's a lot of voices in your head that can say, "Oh my God, you've never done this before, your first time." Blah, blah, blah. But I've had over 25 years of experience as a director and as a storyteller. I know story. I know how to tell a story. So a lot of those conversations had to be, okay, but you know this. It's in a different form. They're different titles. People have different titles, but quite frankly, very similar functions. And at the end of the day, telling a story is telling a story is telling a story. Basic tenets for that do not change. So that journey really forced me to just trust your voice, trust yourself. And, you know, 'cause so often we're very used to second guessing ourselves, doubting ourselves, etc. So that was the big one for me that I'm still learning. But it's a constant reminder.
And now this brings me to my next question. What is your process like as a director? Just a general landscape, or actually, let me make it more specific. What is your process like as a director when you're directing for theater, and what's your process like as a director when you are directing for film and TV?
Yeah, so very similar. Both of those mediums start from the very similar place. I've got to start with what's the core essence of why this story, why now? I've got to answer that question. And I've got to have a very compelling reason. And that becomes the North Star of why this story, why now, that should help to guide every decision, from casting to design decision to, for me, that helps guide sort of what that structure needs to be. What is my theatrical concept, all of that. It starts there. And then from there, then I can build out once I have a very compelling, that excites me. And by compelling, I've got to be excited by it. Because it's those moments when you're in the midst of like a design meeting that you can help to guide even yourself out of the muck and guide your collaborators out of the muck by returning to that answer, right? By returning to why this show, why now? Why this play, why now? Why this film, why now? Right? And then from there, I'm able to build then what is the construct and or idea that helps to answer that Uber question. Why this show, why now? What then that's where the design concepts really start to flow out of. And then hence the direction for my actors and how the interpretation of the language should be guided, right? But it all starts there.
And how does that differentiate for when you're working as a producer?
You know, it's been funny. It doesn't. Yeah.
Oh.
As a producer, no, yeah. As a producer, I've got to be driven. I've got to be motivated. I've got to be inspired. I've got to have to answer the same question of why this, why now? And therefore, my decisions as a producer will flow from that, right? Of who's the design team? Who's the audience? What's the budget? How do we make sure, what are the necessary resources that have to be allotted towards this particular thing in order to accomplish the Uber narrative? It's all the same.
Speaking of the narrative, I wonder now, because you said, you know, you're always asking the question of like, why the play, why now? I wonder, this is the question I have, what is your question to the industry as a whole of now? And how would you, if you had to answer that question? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer it from the industry perspective, but, you know, I think what we're seeing, this would be my question, it's always been, you know, we're seeing a major shift that's happening in our field right now. It's a shift around power structures, the way things have always been done is not necessarily the way that they should be, right? The conversations around representation and diversity, again, which flow right back to power. That's what's being challenged right now in our field, and rightly so, because it's been time. And you know, if art is about creating art for the people, and we're saying creating art for all people, then we've got to really challenge and question the systems that are in place to make sure that we are achieving that Uber goal effectively, right? So that's what I believe it has been, and ultimately what we're beginning to see now with the changing and the turning of the tides in response to that, provocation. Yeah.
So let's rewind and let's go backwards for a bit, because we've been on the breach and we've been on the break. Um, why did you choose to go to Howard?
Why did I choose to go to Howard? So I
Mhm.
grew up in a suburb right outside of Chicago called Oak Park, which I loved growing up in Chicago. My family's from the Caribbean. I wanted to be in a coastal city, but I also very much wanted to be at an HBCU. I wanted to be in a space in which my identity as an African American woman was um, um, the first identifier. Um, was not like, oh, she's the exceptional Black girl, right? Like, I wanted to be in a space where there were other pieces of myself to be explored with my peers, right? Like, and I think going to Howard allowed me to, one, redefine diversity on a whole different level, because everybody was Black. But now it's like, well, where are you from? But what do you like? But how do you think? But what's your aesthetic? Like, there are other things now that became defining points versus just race. Um, and at the same time, being in a space where our identity and cultural history and identity were being affirmed on a 365-day basis, not just during February. So that is what drew me there. And I was able to go and build lifelong friends, lifelong family that I still treasure to today. Howard's a very special place and continues to be for me.
Um, because I'm in this place now, I've been trying to get a lot of my own work out there. I wonder,
Mm-hmm.
what was it like producing and working with friends in school?
I mean, it was the most natural thing, right? Because, in school, you dream together, you build together. That's what you're being trained to do. So these were my first collaborators and continue to be my consistent collaborators. Because we knew each other, we were building our skills together then and now. But there was also a trust, right? Because we knew each other, because we were coming up together, there was sort of that, indelible trust that was there. And, therefore that trust helped us build community, helped us build alignment.
So then, in that trust, I wonder, what lessons did you learn from your friends then as you guys were collaborating together? Like what were some lessons you learned then, and also like as you guys have grown together now too, like what lessons do you learn from them now? How did they inspire you? What did they teach you? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, what's great about it is that I think now is something similar then, right? Like I lean on, even through my film experience, I was able to like reach out to a lot of my friends. I mean, shoot, Ta-Nehisi. I mean, that the whole project kind of started with him, and that was my college friend, right? Like, being able to kind of dream with him and say, hey, I think I've got a way in for this book for theatrical adaptation, which was the furthest thing from his mind, because his thing was like, I wrote the book. But because of our history and relationship, he said, yeah, you know what? I trust you. Go ahead, do your thing. So it was that trust, right? But then we became truly, we collaborated around the project as well. There were ideas and thoughts that he had and shared that were really useful to the film. I also had friends in film and television that, as I was navigating the journey, I could lean on and say, hey, I had a question about this. What do you think about this approach? What do you think about that approach? And they were really able to kind of give their opinion, right, on how to navigate. So, even in that respect, I'm still learning. I'm still learning from my friends and my peers and vice versa. Like we lean on each other in that way, where it's not, you know, a passive, it's very active. Like when I'm at a crossroads, I reach out to that peer group immediately. Say, you know, I'm having this challenging moment and trying to figure out. They're there to help. And that's a really comforting thing, to have that community, to have that sort of people that trusted advisors that you can lean on. It's really key. It's been key for me, I'll say that.
I wonder too, like in that key, there's another key that you just shown in our conversation of how in this trust that you and your friends have, like your intuition has always been strong. And actually, no, I don't want to say this. I don't want to say strong, but your intuition has always been clear. So my first question that I want to know is like, while you were in school too, and still working and like taking classes, like, because it feels like when you're doing all this stuff in school, like a lot is going on around you with the world, and you're also like getting a lot of news as a Black college student, or like as a student, as a college student of color, like you're trying to like decipher so much. But how did you keep your intuition clear? How did you wipe the window so you could still see out of it and still dream while in school?
Well, I think, you know, what's interesting is that by being in school, I think our training is all about, I, I get fed by dreaming, right? A lot of times in schools, you're getting tools to produce, you're getting tools around, these are the rules, right? But what inspired me is like, yes, learning the rules, but also breaking the rules. That's what inspires me, right? That's what dreaming is about. Dreaming is like, okay, I understand the parameters. I understand what this tool is meant to do, but what if it could do this? But what about this? But what if we told a story in this way? But what if, right? That's what's exciting. And that's not necessarily something that you learn in school. I mean, that's something that you learn throughout humanity, right? Like, I mean, that's what art is about, right? Like, it is about dreaming. We're doing art before we come to theater school or to a training program. You know, we learn how to dance before we can walk. We learn how to sing before we can talk. This is always innately who we are as humans. I think it's always the journey of, because structures have been placed on us, it's always a journey trying to get back to that point of inspiration, trying to get back to that point of dreaming, trying to get back to that sort of infancy point of freedom and getting free. So it's always a journey. It was a journey then, it's always, you know, and now to be able to create space to dream. I tell a lot of, you know, students who I work with, I'm always encouraging them in that respect, but it's also an encouragement for myself, because I think that the more structured places, institutions, you know, conservatories that you're in, structure is almost the antithesis to dreaming, but dreaming is the core. That is the core of who we are and what we do. So we can't lose that. We cannot. So I'm always trying to find ways to spur that, whether that's keeping people close who inspire me, whether that's creating spaces where I can be inspired, whether that's encouraging others to continue to be inspired and dream. That feeds me also. So yeah, that's what I would say in school, but also now.
How do you then, in this thing, because I think I love in your process that you brought up is the importance of collaboration. Um, and so now I wonder, how do you know who to collaborate with? Um,
Oh, that's
and
easy.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that's easy. Oh no, yeah, you had a second part.
Yeah, it was like, how do you know who to collaborate with, and like people that like as a young artist too, when you're trying to get work out there, like you get, or as an up and coming artist or someone trying to start out with your work, like you feel like you got to reach out to everybody possible so that way you can make like one idea come to fruition when that's not the case, right? So I wonder, like, how do you know who to trust when like collaborating and encountering like new people coming at you from different lenses, and like how do you filter out collaborators, if that makes sense?
I think it's all about, like, do I like you? Do we really have a personal connection? Because I think in collaboration, there's so much that's shared. There is so, especially in theater, you're spending a lot of hours together. There's a lot of time together. You got to like who's sitting across from you or who's sitting next to you. For me, very simple. I've actually got to like you. That's first and foremost. And then I got to be inspired by what you do. But if I don't like you, but your work is dope, it's not going to be a good collaboration. I feel like, and I see this, and I've seen this a lot even with my mentors, like they work with the same people over and over again, because you're not just building a career of the work that you produce, you're building it with a career of the community that you build. And building community is, again, not just about producing work, but it's cultivating people, relationships, friendships. Can I laugh with you? Can I have a cocktail with you? Those are the important questions for me around collaborators. I gotta like them, because we work too hard. We work far too many hours for me to be spending so much time with the other person away from my family and not like them. Nah, it's not worth it.
I'm just trying to think now on, gosh, I'm trying to remember. You had said something about collaborators and like, yeah, how like you may not like the person, but if their work is dope, like it's a no. And like, I wonder, like, what would you say to somebody who has the fear of saying no in that way? Because there are times where I've like wanted to, like, I write a play, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this play would be so freaking cool. I don't have money to pay any of my friends, but hey, let's get together and put on this play, right? And also then there's also that thing of like, well, I know this person who has really good work who can make my vision come true, but like I don't like them and I'm scared to say no. Like what do you do with that? Or like what do you advise for people when you feel that?
I mean, I think you just gotta trust that the right circumstance to bring your work alive, you gotta keep searching. You gotta keep searching until the circumstances are right. Because then if the signs are there, you're setting yourself up for failure, for a bad experience. And you've just got to weigh it out, right? Do I want to suffer through a bad experience and get my work done? Or do I want to hold out and wait and get my work done and have an amazing experience? For me, I'd rather the latter, because when I look back on my life, on my career, I want to be able to say, that was great. I had a great time. I worked with some great people. Oh yeah, we did a brilliant thing. I'd rather the experience not be marred. I'd rather it be brilliant.
I'm sorry. I was just thinking on that. Like, I just wanted to, like, it was like, in a weird way, it was
It's
like
all-
it's like you when you have words wash over you in a weird way. That was like a trick. I was like, but
let it wash. Let it
like let
wash.
it
Let it
wash
wash.
exactly. And it's just, I don't know. It's just there's always like a fear. You feel like, you know what? Now in the American economic system, this is another question I have. We're always taught, especially in school, like I'm in school right now, and like what's helped me like not lose my mind is like not think of making the grade in a capitalist way, and also like as in drama school as well, like creating my art in a capitalist way. And like, I wonder for you, like, how do you, what's it like for you creating art away from capitalism, but rather for community? Because like I think like especially in Black culture, because I'm Nigerian, and like I noticed this when I came to America at a young age too, was that like collectivism has always been prominent amongst different Black societies across the world. And so there is a difference between like making art for collectivism and community rather than making art like with the capitalistic gaze on and that pressure to
Yeah,
create, put out, if that makes sense.
sure. I mean, I'm not going to lie and say that it's not there, right? That would be very Pollyanna of me to say that capitalism is not a factor. Capitalism is always a factor. But I think it's important that you bring your values to any table that you are sitting at. And for me, a major value is building community. That is a major value before building commerce. Um, so that guides my decisions. It guides projects I will and won't do. It guides the way in which I build projects. It guides my collaborators. Um, going back to that first point, there might be a point where I may not, instead of working with the biggest star, I would rather work with a good person.
Mm.
So again, though all of those factors, I think affect the way in which I move through the world. And that just speaks to values, right? For me, it speaks to my value system. Again, not to say that capitalism is not a factor. It's a very real factor in everything that we do. This is just the world. This is the economic system that we are living under. And I would be lying if I said that, no, I don't, no. Money drives, dollar drives, commerce drives, output drives as well. But your values can help you individually navigate those waters. That's all what I have control over.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna change gears to another fun question now.
Okay.
If you could have a cocktail with any rapper and playwright at the same time, who would you
Okay.
pick
Oh my goodness.
and why?
Any rapper and playwright. Oh, that's interesting.
Because
Who would
hip
I
hop is
pick?
all about rhythm and poetry, and plays also have rhythm and poetry. Um,
Hmm.
so it's just like,
Who would I want to pick? Okay. Maybe I would want to have a cocktail. Um, I would love to have a cocktail with, and I can't be talking about the same rappers like the last question. Okay, but I think I think I would want to have a cocktail with um Yassine Bey, because I think he has some very interesting, he's funny, and I think that would just be fun person to drink with. And then I think I would also, from a playwriting perspective, I would want to have a cocktail also with Adrian Kennedy and Yassine Bey. I think the combination would just, I think I would need to be drinking with the two of them at the table and whatever they would be talking about. I would need alcohol to understand and decipher.
it's funny because like I just thought of like a playwright that if I were in that situation too, I would have gone with Adrian Kennedy. But you know who I would have gone rapper wise? I would have loved to see Adrian Kennedy and Nicki Minaj debate Black feminist theory with like a hint of Bell Hooks and Lorraine Hansberry. That I would be so dope to see that.
Oh, now that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah.
Right. Um, so then my next question here is what is your advice for students in drama school, especially like students of color in drama school?
Yeah. You know what? Um, I And it's kind of something I said a little earlier, but my biggest advice is know that you have the power to career, build the rooms, build the spaces, build the theaters that you want to live in. You all have the power. So don't think as though it is all just you having to fit in a pre-existing system. That does not exist. You have the power to create it. I think it's important that we realize that the dreaming of the world goes beyond just the creative output. It is also dreaming of the world and the circumstances that you want to swim and live in.
And what would you say for the young, or like not the young, because I believe we're always young at heart and like growing and like always child. This is a personal thing, but rather for the director and producer starting out,
Mm-hmm.
especially while in school when you don't know the right grants to apply for that, and like that's a whole other thing. Like, what do you advise for them?
I think that, one, I think producing is an instinctual thing, right? Um, as you gain more resources, the toolbox will grow. But you have more at your hands, you have more at your fingertips than you actually realize to produce. Producing at every single level is about being resourceful with what you have access to. Sometimes we always think it's, oh my God, I just, as long as I can get that $5 million budget, and then when you get that 5 million, once I get that $15 million budget, then once I get that 25 million, no. Producing, whether you have $5 or 5 million, is all about being resourceful. So it's not about you having to get to the right grants. It's having to say, all right, if we've got $5, what can we do with it? And how best can I leverage what I have around me to get this thing done? Because whether you have 5 million, or 50 million, that's always going to be the core conversation, period. This is a pot that I have. How can I get this done? So learn it now. Now is the best training ground, because if you can do it with 5, then 5 million gets a lot easier, then 50 million gets a lot easier, then 55 million gets a lot easier.
When was the moment that you knew you wanted to produce and direct? Because I think,
That was
oh, sorry, because I think that like imposter syndrome is always so prevalent, especially when we're in school and like coming out of it. But I wonder, like, yeah, like I wonder for you, like, when was that moment that you were like, I am this. I don't need to prove this to anyone or myself.
so I would say this: the first moment that I knew was in high school, when I produced and directed a play then. And then I went to college to study medicine, right? I just say that to say that antithesis is that, there was a point where I didn't believe I could do it for a living, although I was doing it. I think imposter syndrome will always follow you, but it's your job to quiet the small noises in your head and trust your voice and trust your gut, that you are meant to be in this room, you are meant to be at this table, you are meant to have that title, and you are meant to be doing the job that you're doing.
What were some playwrights that inspired you to direct when you were in school?
When I was in school, I would say Pearl Clegg, George Wolfe, Adrian Kennedy, and then my friends who were writing at that time. Like, we were directing each other's works. So that's like the writer in Sahu Injikam. We were in school together. I was inspired by his writing, I was inspired by my friends, and yeah, as well as with, writers out in the field.
And are there any playwrights that you are reading now? Like that, have they changed, and like how has that changed, and who are you reading now? And it could also be
I'm
like any
inspired.
writers in general. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I'm inspired by a lot of new work that's out there. I'm inspired by writers like Ike Holter. I'm inspired by um, writers like Ngozi Anweyu. Um, I think there's so many, inspired by writers like Jocelyn Bio. I'm just, I'm just inspired by a lot of folks right now. Which just gives me hopeful for the field and what's happening.
The thing that you talked about with the artists that inspire you, that like when I think about their art is like identity and how that's like so prevalent in it.
Yeah.
And also with your work too, like it is basic, it not even basically, it is like an example of like as an artist when they say bring your identity to the technique. So I wonder, what does identity in art mean to you?
I think they're interchangeable, right? Because I think as theater artists, um, oh shoot, as theater artists, we are performing our humanity. Core part of our humanity is identity. So there's no way that I can leave that at home and be successful at this craft. Like it is interchangeable, right? Like there's no way, so it's important. It's not only important, it's critical for me to be true to myself, to the art, to the craft. I've got to bring my full self. It just is.
And what role does that like play in the projects that you do?
So, I mean, I choose projects, I think, where I can fully be that. It's in ways that I can fully, I'm inspired. When I think about Soul Train, when I think about, the projects I choose, Veer Stark is another one, which is all about Black woman, female identity in media. That was a complete reflection of who I am, right? And of the world and the space that I inhabit. So that was everything, I would say, for sure.
And if you weren't, this may be a strange question, but like if you weren't producing or directing, what would you be doing? Or what would you do?
Be policy work? I don't know. I have no idea. That's a good question.
I just always love to ask that question to artists because it's like so many times there's this notion that we're taught, if you love anything other than your craft, you're not in the right thing. And I'm like, craft shouldn't be abusive. Why do we think that
Yeah.
it should be the be all end
Yeah.
all? And so
Yeah, no, it's true. That's a good thing. I, what would I be doing? Maybe policy work, maybe. That could be interesting.
what do
I'm
you do
interested
for your
again in
days off? For, oh, sorry.
days off. I love being with my family. Barbecues, hanging with my kid, my husband, meeting up with friends, talking about just life and living families, just regular stuff. Yeah. So, that is time to truly unplug. That's not like not thinking about the craft in that way every single moment when I don't have to.
I know I had asked this about like when did you know and decide that you were a producer and director, but a thing that I want to ask is like, because this was something I'd been asking myself earlier in school, where you go through that thing of, at least for like Black students, like training at a PWI, it's like, do I want to be an actor or do I want to be a Black actor? And by that, I mean like, sometimes when we're told like I identify as a Black actor, like people are always like, it's always that thing that you think it just means like only Black roles, but that's not the case because like I'm Black, so any role I play, regardless of who writes it, the character will be Black. And so I wonder, for being behind the scenes, like when was the moment that you knew, what, like I am, and slash I, like even going into this field and going into these rooms, like I am a Black female producer and director. if that makes sense. Rather than like, I know I'm a producer and director and I'm in this room.
That's an interesting one. I don't know if I've ever thought about that. And partly because I think I've been intentional about being in Black spaces. So the qualifier of being a Black producer is less important in those spaces. Because it's a given. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure exactly how to navigate that particular question. But to say, but to say that is that I'm intentional about, being in Black spaces, uplifting Black spaces, building Black spaces, whether that's from a creative art space, and that doesn't mean that I don't work with large white institutions, I do, but I'm also very intentional about the space that I'm ultimately creating in those institutions. And those are spaces for Black artists, including myself. So intentional Black spaces. Yeah.
And
which quite frankly, yeah. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I actually, you were done. You were about to say something. I wasn't
going to say anything else. No.
Okay. I was gonna ask, what was the best advice you received from a mentor while in undergrad, and what was the best advice you received from a mentor post grad?
So what I would say was actually the same advice. One mentor in undergrad that I received was, we were all super anxious about graduating and not knowing what to do. Do we go to grad school? What are we going to do? Oh my God, this career is so uncertain. I don't know. And, she told us to just sit down and breathe. The answers will come to you. Just sit, just breathe. She literally had us meditate for a whole hour. And it's funny because I look back on that now, and in the moment I was so frustrated because I was like, oh my God, what was the answer? Like, what are we supposed to do? Do we go to New York? Do we go to LA? Do we go to grad school? That's what we want to know. And really what she was teaching us is to be still. Is that, this career and this field requires stillness. So many times we want to find the right thing, we want to do the right thing, the right move, the exact da-da-da. And quite frankly, when building a career on this journey, on this path, there is no right move, there is no right model, right? It is all about building the road while you're walking. So your path is going to look vastly different from your peer's path. It's going to look vastly different from your mentor's path. And so the stillness that is required so that you make the right moves for yourself is what's most important. That's one. Post-graduation, one of the best lessons that I learned is walk through mistakes slowly. Many times we want to move very quickly when we've made a mistake, when we've made failures. And the challenging part out of that, if we move too quickly, is we don't learn. So it is important to walk through failures slowly so that you get the lesson in order to take with you moving forward.
I wonder now, if you don't mind, is it okay asking this? Is it okay if I ask about a time where you have had to remind yourself to walk through a failure / mistake slowly in the craft?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been time around managing a people, right? There was an actor, I remember I was directing a show, and I had an actor who was going through what I didn't realize at the time was mental illness. I couldn't pick it up at the time. So I didn't really know appropriately how to manage the situation. And the reason why, I count that as, less of a failure, but more so as a lesson, is that I had other people around that were not comfortable. And I did not I know now how to make space, how to make sure that everyone feels safe moving forward, and has the tools to feel safe as well. I didn't then. I was just focused on getting the show up. But when we think about like the holistic people and how to make sure that people feel taken care of, that was a really key lesson to be learned.
And gosh, this makes, I don't want it to sound redundant, but I'm just thinking of that, like, because there is no one way of like remaining still. Stillness can mean whatever it means for whomever and whomever. It's a very individualistic thing, but a collective need. So I wonder, what are just like some like little tricks or tips that you would give to like somebody or like that student who doesn't feel like they can be still, or like as a Black student sometimes I felt like I don't have the permission to be still, when that isn't the case. I do have that, but you know what I mean, like what are some things or actions that have helped contribute to your stillness, aside from like what you've touched on in previous questions? Oh, you're muted, by the way.
But okay. Sometimes I feel like we always have to have the answer immediately, when quite frankly, I think we've got to understand, sometimes you need a couple days to think about it. Leadership is not about having the answer right then and there. Take the time, take the space to really deliberate, to confer. I think that's important. I think that's important. That to me is around stillness. And sometimes, it's the answer might come to you a year later. Who knows? But take that time, take that space to be thoughtful, not just always to feel like you're being right. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
That was a good, that way. Do you mind just repeating that couplet one more time again that you just said? Or not a couplet, but like wait, those last 2 points that you just said, just because like you went out a bit and I want us to get what you said recorded. Like,
yeah, I said, take the time to be thoughtful with your answers and with your decisions, versus always trying to rush to a conclusion. It's better to be thoughtful and take your time to come to a conclusion versus come to a conclusion quickly thinking you're being right.
well, folks, you heard it here and you didn't hear it anywhere. Once again, we're so thankful for having you, Kamillah. Like, this was the most fun conversation. It was a key the entire time, regardless, and I'm gonna say irregardless of technical difficulties. I'm like, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your words. Thank you for your wisdom. Tune in for our upcoming sit down series and conversations to follow. And have a good evening, everyone.